affairs and talk global trade. In this afternoon session, our panel is ready and our keynote speaker is also ready. We're going to be discussing scaling the tide, customs administration in the globalized age. Our keynote speaker is Mr. Pranab Das, who is a director for compliance and facilitation at the World Customs Organization. Now, Mr. Pranab Kumar Das is the director and has over 36 years of experience in customs and indirect tax administration, having worked in various positions in the frontline offices and specialized directorates of customs and indirect taxes in India. Mr. Das's deep commitment to customs reforms has seen India's World Bank ranking under the pillar of trading across borders improve from position 146 in 2017 to position 68 in 2019, and overall EODB rankings from 100 in 2017 to 63 in 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, it is now my honor to welcome Mr. Das to address us on scaling the heights, customs administration in the globalized age. Mr. Das, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Am I visible?
Let me just confirm if you're visible. Yes, you are visible, Mr. Pranab.
Okay. That's wonderful. Good afternoon, dear delegates. I am Pranab Kumar Das, Director of Compliance and Facilitation in World Customs Organization. I am very happy to be here in this session. I first thank the organizers for inviting WCO to attend this important seminar. Dear colleagues, over the last 7 decades, globalization has been the most powerful force that shapes the world, no matter in political, economical, societal, and cultural terms, or in our day-to-day life. Prevalence of multilateralism and emergence of international organizations have paved solid foundation for globalization. The World Customs Organization, as the unique intergovernmental international organization on customs affairs, and the mission we carry out are part of the efforts for facilitating globalization. Recently, a number of factors such as the COVID pandemic, geopolitical conflicts, food supply shortages, energy price issues pose challenges to the process of globalization. We have to acknowledge the fact that confidence in globalization is more likely to vacillate at the moment than ever before. But we will need to see at the same time that the force of globalization has demonstrated its resilience, adaptability, and perseverance. And a remarkable aspect of globalization is international trade. The ideology of trade liberalization is an enduring and dynamic engine that drives globalization forward. World trade today is roughly 40 times in volume and 300 times in value the level it was in 1950s. This leap in a large degree is attributed to international customs communities' endeavor. Trade liberalization is essentially about eliminating tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. In both the dimensions, customs' role is always remarkable, from laying down the HS codes, implementing rules of origin and customs valuation, to simplifying and harmonizing customs trade formalities, realizing customs modernization, and coordinating different agencies at the borders under the auspices of trade facilitation. Regional integration is an important part of globalization, especially on the back of trade. The African Continental Free Trade Area is a successful example which embraces most countries in Africa as one of the free trade agreements that cover the largest population and geographical size. AFCTFTA members are committed to eliminating tariff and non-tariff measures to a high degree with the aim to creating a single and liberalized market throughout the continent. AFCFTA member customs administrations have paid sufficient tribute to regional integration by simplifying trade procedures, shortening the release time for goods, upgrading the single window systems, enhancing customs to customs cooperations. For example, the community based systems CBS established by the Kenya Revenue Authority is a quite impressive example in this regard. The CBS serves as the national single window and integrates all necessary governmental agencies and the business communities. In other words, the approaches made by the KRA as well as other customs administrations in Africa are also indivisible composition of the WCO membership's dedication to globalization. I would like to take this opportunity to appreciate the contributions that customs colleagues across the world have made to the recovery of economy, trade, and society during the pandemic. In 2021, WCO set the theme of the year as customs bolstering recovery, renewal, and resilience for a sustainable supply chain, and therein called on the international customs community to reinforce collaboration, to drive the recovery processes, embrace advanced technologies, to enable innovative and digital methodologies applied in customs operations, and enhance preparedness of customs administration's staff through awareness raising and capacity building, as well as technical assistance wherever mandated. As a result of these efforts in these aspects, the world trade and global supply chain are ready for regaining vitality, and we are seeing such recovery world over. In the meanwhile, we must see that the pandemic has not ended, and there are still huge tasks on our shoulders. On the other hand, it is not the time for us to unwind, especially as many of the projects against the pandemic, for example, measures for quickly releasing vaccines and medical supplies are underway. On the other hand, we need to reflect on what the world would be after the pandemic and take on updated measures and proactive guidance in this regard. It is evident, at least, that post-pandemic world would be thoroughly enter into a digital era. Digitalization in many areas, including manufacturing, financing, trade, etc., have already commenced years ago, but the pandemic expedited the process of digitalization when it comes to customs, demands for paperless documentation, remote submission, advanced electronic cargo submissions, non-intrusive inspection, and so on become more urgent before the pandemic. Therefore, methods for customs operations need to change. Technological innovation features the digital era. Recently, WCO published WCO-WTO study report on disruptive technologies 2022. The report enumerates a list of emerging technologies such as blockchain, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, and biometrics, virtual reality, 3D printing, drone usage that customs administration can build into their day-to-day work on trade facilitation. Our survey demonstrates that customs administrations have benefited extensively from these technologies and are expanding the scope of application. Moreover, WCO dedicated 2022 theme to scaling up customs digital transformation by embracing a data culture and building a data ecosystem. The WCO has also led its data strategy, which contains three building blocks, namely data sharing, communities of practitioners, assistance to members. Hereby, I would like to suggest WCO member customs administrations be well prepared for the digital transformation as early as possible. And now let me focus on WCO as one of the advocates of globalization in the context of post-pandemic. The lessons that we have learned from the circumstances of the pandemic, food supplies shortages, energy crisis, point out that globalization remains true the rule of thumb for recovery of the world. Globalization entails cooperation between all stakeholders, not only individual countries, but also international organizations, the private sector, and the citizens. The role of international organizations, which are driven by the numerous members, is salient because they are usually providing public products that universally benefit various countries across the globe. I'd like to mention WCO vision statement, borders divide and customs connects, which coincides with the essence of globalization. The WCO, as headquarters of the international customs community, has provided a rich set of public products that take the form of conventions, compendiums, guidelines, notes, and capacity building projects, etc. Within the WCO strategic plan, trade facilitation, revenue collection, protection of society, and organizational development stand as the strategic objectives that represent the main areas of customs functions. The WCO has developed instruments and tools on trade facilitation, like e-commerce, framework of standards to secure and facilitate trade, safe framework, single window, authorized economic operator, coordinated border management, data model, advanced passenger information, passenger name record, disaster management and supply chain continuity, etc. I believe that these WCO instruments and tools will be conducive to WCO member customs administrations, modernization initiatives, and members' engagement in globalized supply chain allocation and integration. On the customs tax cooperation, the WCO has published guidelines for strengthening cooperation and exchanging of information between customs and tax authorities at the national level. Customs administration and tax administrations as well may refer to the guidelines when they're designing mechanisms and legal framework. For example, MOUs for customs tax cooperation, exchanging information and data between two administrations, taking on joint actions, training of staff from the two administrations, mutually benefiting from this exercise. WCO has provided capacity building on this topic in some countries in Asia and Pacific region, South America, North America, Central America, and Caribbean region as well. If there are needs from customs administration in Africa in this respect, WCO would be pleased to incorporate the projects for general capacity building plan. Besides working with more than 180 members, 184 precisely, the WCO also attaches great importance to synergy between other international organizations and cooperation with the private sector and academia on many such issues, such as trade facilitation, negotiations, establishment of single window, anti-terrorism, anti-corruption, preservation of flora and fauna, natural disaster relief, protection of intellectual property, fight against narcotic smuggling, updating HS codes, and so on. WCO has created partnership with WTO, UNECE, UNCTAD, even ODC, WHO, etc. All the partnership enriches the instruments and tools for globalization. Also, WCO constitutes private sector consultative group where the representatives of companies or industrial associations from private sector would sing their voices to the WCO and customs administrations. And this helps a wider hearing of globalized concerns by the general population at large. In Africa, WCO looks forward to consolidating relationship with not only member customs administrations, but also regional organizations such as AFCFTA, Secretariat, the private sector, and academia. In spite of the conclusions, in spite of that, we difficulties stemming from the pandemic, food and energy shortages, and so on, the strides of globalization have not stopped. The era ahead of us will be featured with digitalization. Customs administrations should be prepared for a new digital era. The WCO, as a multilateral intergovernmental organization, is an advocate of globalization, um, and the many instruments and tools that I have just enumerated have and will continue to benefit its members in better participating in the globalized international economy and trade. I'm sure the customs administrations gear up to this new challenge and reap the benefit of globalization as it has never before. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumar Das, for that very well articulated keynote address for the afternoon session, talking about the work of WCO, the ease of the movement of persons and goods, the single window system, challenging us on eliminating tariff and non-tariff barriers. And with that canvas that has been painted, allow me, delegates, to bring us to our discussion this afternoon. Mr. Das, if you could still please hang on as we discuss with our panelists in the afternoon. We have a Q&A where our delegates are posting questions, and we shall be able to field a few of those questions to you and to also the panelists. Now to discuss on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area that Mr. Das has also hinted on, is our AFCTA a catalyst for trade and value chain recovery in Africa? That's what we shall be discussing with our panelists who are also on call. So allow me to introduce them one by one. We have Mr. Peter Jonjo. Mr. Peter Jonjo is the CEO of Twiga Foods. He co-founded it, and he is the group CEO of Twiga Foods, a B2B business-to-business e-commerce company that focuses on food and grocery in the informal retail. Twiga currently employs about 1,000 people and has about 100,000 customers, delivering to about 10,000 customers every single day. The second discussant that we have is Mr. Jean Guy. Mr. John Guy is the regional coordinator at the Africa Development Bank, and he's the acting director of the Regional Integration Coordination Office. In his capacity, Mr. Guy Africa oversees the day-to-day management of the department and reports on strategic performance of the bank's active regional integration portfolio, currently valued at 13 billion US dollars. He is also supporting the design and financing of regional infrastructure investments and coordinates the bank's engagement and policy dialogue with the Africa Union, the regional economic communities, and the Secretariat of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Our third panelist is Commissioner for Customs and Border Control right here at the Kenya Revenue Authority, and that's Miss Lilian Nyawanda. Now, Miss Lilian Nyawanda has a broad wealth of experience in customs and international trade with the East Africa region and the African continent at large. She also has extensive experience in policy and legislation, having been part of various legislative reviews and changes. She has gained her experience from the public and private sectors as well as academia. Our next panelist is Flavor Businje. She is the Acting Director Customs at the EAC Secretariat. She is a seasoned customs expert with more than 18 years experience in coordinating, implementing, and managing customs policies, laws, and procedures at national and regional levels. Currently, she's the Acting Director at the East Africa Community, Acting Director of Customs at EAC, spearheading the implementation of the East Africa Community Single Customs Territory with the ultimate goal of attaining a fully functional customs union. And last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Alban Odhiambo. He is the Senior Director, Trade Environment Chief at Trademark East Africa, or what we like to call TIMEA. Alban is an entrepreneurial ICT and business development expert with over 15 years experience in designing, developing and implementing trade, transport and logistics systems that aim to enhance efficiency and sound governance of public and private sector organizations such as customs administrations, port authorities, standards and quality agencies, among others. He has been involved in the implementation of information systems across Eastern Africa and Asia. Esteemed delegates, we have only the best of panelists for you this afternoon as we break down the Africa Continental Free Trade Area discussion, and we ask ourselves, is this a catalyst for trade and value chain recovery in Africa? I want to start the conversation with you, Peter Jonjo. And Peter, good afternoon. Good to see you. I saw you in the morning and thank you for staying on with us. One quick thought on Mr. Kumar Das's presentation. Plus, I want you to also delve a little bit and tell us what has been the impact on livelihoods in Kenya for Twiga Foods. Mr. Jonjo?
No, thank you so much, and thank you so much, Regani, for having me on this esteemed panel. I think the first thing is to step back and look at how her value chains have been disrupted, because sometimes when we talk about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, it's good to also have a context in terms of a problem that we're trying to solve. I look back during the COVID period, and many of you were aware that at some point, containers in the world got displaced and goods could not move as freely as they used to. And when I look at before COVID, and you look at the amount of rice that was coming into Kenya from Thailand and India, was a significant amount. And if you looked at the ports and all the warehouses around the coast, everywhere was full of Indian and Pakistani rice. Something interesting happened when we had the disruption of a value chain and it became extremely expensive to import rice. We suddenly discovered that our neighbor Tanzania has enough rice to actually meet the Kenyan requirement. And it was very, very interesting to note this, that, you know, and that's the first time actually I took a trip going out into Tanzania. And I was surprised by the quantum of rice that exists. Kenya today imports maybe about 650,000 metric tons of rice. Tanzania produces 2.2 million metric tons of rice. It is enough to feed all of East Africa based on the requirement that we have. And the key thing is that sometimes you'd never discover that because smallholder farmers are sitting with inventory and have nowhere to sell the rice. They're actually sitting on a surplus, while on this other side, we're actually spending Forex, importing from countries actually that want us to pay in dollars, yet we'd have paid in local currency. So, and this starts opening our eyes in terms of just the potential that we have in this space. Another one I want to note is around maize. Today we are having a maize shortfall in the country, but if you look at the amount of maize that's coming from, again, Tanzania, coming again from Zambia, it starts telling you a story that if we then have a bit more coordination amongst African countries, a significant opportunity for us to actually start making a significant impact in terms of how we operate. The other thing I wanted to highlight is we've also seen significant issues around things like fertilizer, because we're being hit from two sides. There's a devaluation of a shilling, and then there's a commodity inflation because of the war that we have in with Russia. And that's why you're seeing, for example, the government starting to talk about the importance of doing this, because unless we get fertilizer and other commodities to be affordable, we will continue importing. And it's very sad to see Kenya today importing very, very basic commodities. So I think if we can restrict our importation to neighboring countries and manage the Forex, and then also start figuring out ways in which we can create affordability of inputs, then that has a huge impact. But let's talk about the livelihoods, which was a question, the second question that you talked about. The key thing that is interesting is that if you look at the history of Kenya over the last 10 years, household per capita income in nominal terms has been growing in the single digit space. When you adjust it for inflation, it is declining, which means that affordability is becoming a very, very big issue in Kenya today. And the key thing is that because of a commodity pricing or because of inflation, we are seeing changes in consumption behavior. I'll give you an example that I saw that was very, very interesting. During COVID, the price of wheat flour became cheaper, actually was half the price of maize flour at some point during COVID. And it was very interesting when I went out into the market to actually visit, the mamas who cook for the construction sites. It was very interesting. Overnight, everyone switched from ugali, and now everyone was having chapati and tea. And it just showed you that how quickly consumer trends change on account of affordability. So the key thing is that I think we've had significant challenges around affordability, and I think there's a huge opportunity for us to address waste. Where we work as Twiga is working on value chains and eliminating waste. You know, many of you might not know, for example, 50% of the tomatoes that are produced in the country sometimes don't make it to the retailer or don't make it to the consumer. A lot of that is actually lost due to handling and post-harvest losses. And when you think about the wastefulness of the informality of our supply chain, I think there's a huge opportunity in terms of sorting out some of those challenges. And that's basically what Twiga does. We leverage technology, we make investments in infrastructure to eliminate this waste because we can see that the consumer is very, very stressed right now. And they're basically looking at ways in which they can access food more affordably. So when I put all that together, I think there's a strong case around import substitution, localizing our value chains, and where we're not able to do that, there's an even stronger case for the Africa Continental Free Trade area, because then you find that there's a lot of our neighbors who actually have surpluses and we don't have to pay for that food using foreign currency. So that's basically some of the trends that I see in our space and some of the dynamics that I see that are becoming more and more relevant in this food security conversation.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that. And even just sharing the opportunities that Kenya saw thanks to COVID, when we now turned to our neighbor right here who had the food that we were looking for across the seas. But I want to bring in Commissioner Lillian, who's the Commissioner for Customs and Border Control. Hearing what Peter has said in terms of the leveraging on opportunities that cross-border trade can give us, and hearing what Kumar Das also presented, then my question to you is, what is Kenyan Customs experience in championing integrated cross-border trade to facilitate legitimate trade within the country?
Thank you again, and thank you, Kumar and Peter, for the insights. So I'll just take us through what integrated border management means, then I'll go deep into the Kenyan experience. So basically, integrated border management is the organization and supervision of border agency activities to meet the common challenge of facilitating movement of legitimate people and goods while maintaining secure borders and meeting national legal requirements. Basically, it's coordinating all this together: movement of goods, people across the borders, and ensuring that we are protecting our borders and we are facilitating trade, along the process. So integrated border management has three pillars. So one is intra-service cooperation. That is basically cooperation within the same agency. So if I can talk about KRA, how does this work? We have different departments in KRA. Of course, Custom is the one that leads in terms of border management and coordination, but within KRA, we have other departments like our ISO department, investigation and enforcement, where we work together, we coordinate so that our activities then are not in competition, but we cooperate together to ensure that we are protecting our borders, and we handle smuggling and all other things that may be interfering with our trade, and we facilitate along the way. Having talked about intra-service cooperation, that is within the organization, in this case it's authority, the next pillar is inter-service cooperation. Now this is cooperation across different agencies. So Kenya has different agencies that we brought together, and we take a whole government approach. So in managing our borders, we have actually more than 20 agencies that are in this process. So we've come together, and for the land borders, customs, basically under KRA, is the lead agency. For the air, anything coming through air, then we have the Kenya Airports Authority leading, and anything to the port is led by the Kenya Ports Authority. But if I can talk about the, basically the land borders, we have agencies like the National Police, the National Intelligence Service, we have the Kenya Maritime Authorities, KEFIS, Kenya Defense Forces, the immigrations, all these come together. And then we take one approach, because whereas immigrations may be dealing with individuals' movement, customs is dealing with the movement of cargo. So when you put all Kenya Defense Forces looks at protecting our borders, so all this put together, then there's concerted effort and coordinated approach in handling our border issues. So that's the second pillar. The third pillar is international cooperation. So we've dealt with, managing ourselves within the authority and organization. Now we've dealt with different agencies, pulling the different agencies together, to be able to manage our borders. Then the third point is now cooperation across our national borders. So that's where EAC comes in, COMESA comes in, ACFTA comes in. And if I can delve deeper into this, we have several partner agencies and development partners that we work with. We have Trademark represented here in this panel. We have UNODC, WCO, we have the US Customs and Border Protection, we have Interpol, we have JZ. All these are development partners that help us in this process. However, if we can talk about in terms of the border points, some of the initiatives we have in the land borders is the one-stop border posts. So Kenya has 7 one-stop border posts. That's basically Moyale, Isebania, Malaba, Busia, Namanga, Taveta, Lunga, all bordering different countries. Ethiopia on the north, we have Uganda, we have Tanzania. And in all these border points, we have a coordinated approach where with Uganda, for example, if goods are crossing into Malaba, we only clear the goods at one point. So move exports from Kenya to Uganda, the goods arrive at Malaba, which is the border point between the two countries. They cross over to Uganda, then they are cleared at that point. And and vice versa. If goods are coming into Kenya from Tanzania and they're coming through Namanga, they cross over at Namanga into Kenya, and then they're cleared at that point. So that way we remove the duplication of, of clearance and paperwork and all that. So we have just one stop border point. So having talked about the 3 pillars, then I'll talk more about Kenya. So how did this, coordinated agency and border management operations come across? So again, this came through legislation. So we have the Border Control and Operations Coordinated Committee, we call it BCOCC, which was established through security laws, an Amendment Act of 2014. So we have the legislative framework that then gives us the power to operate in that, in that management. So in terms of levels, we have the Border Management Secretariat, which is the executive level of the different agencies. And then we have now border management committees on every border point. So at the land borders, we'll have committees that are led by customs team who chair this, the different agencies. And then at Mombasa and the airport, we have joint operations centers again, where we bring together the different agencies, and we have lead agencies there. So basically, in terms of how this has helped us, in terms of efficiencies at the border point, bringing the agencies together means there's a coordinated approach, there's a whole government approach on our side. Efficiency, even with the other countries, the agencies on the other side and across the borders, efficiency and compliance levels have gone up because we have one mandate and we are all pulling towards the same direction. Efficiency, revenue uplift, we've seen increase in terms of the revenue you're collecting, because again, with this approach, then we're able to safeguard smuggling and other illicit trade and ensure that we are facilitating legitimate trade and getting the revenue that ideally is due. We've also ensured integration of our systems, like, for example, Uganda and Tanzania under the single custom territory, we've integrated our system, so it makes it easier, to clear the cargo and to facilitate trade. One of the other issues I want to highlight is the impact, apart from, just our core mandate of trade facilitation revenue, and, one of the impacts we've had is even in the community, where we come in together as agencies, be it at Moyale or Malaba or Taveta, be it at the border between Namanga, where Kenya and Tanzania are coming in, the community around there has grown. And we've seen impact in terms of, businesses cropping up, economic activities coming up. We've had a lot of influence and impact on the community. We've trained a lot of our women, especially, and there's a lot of focus on women and small scale traders. So there's a lot of that also, the softer issue that we are looking at, this, just apart from our core mandate of trade facilitation and revenue collection. So again, those are my few remarks on integrated border management. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lillian, and especially of highlighting the three areas, the three corporations: intra-service, inter-service, and international cooperation. And I just want to borrow on that and leverage also on what Peter talked about in terms of buying the rice from Tanzania. And I want to bring on board Flavia from the EAC. Now, Kumar Das talked about the single and liberalized market throughout the continent. From an EAC perspective, hearing what Peter has talked about, how easy, or maybe it was not too easy, but then it was simpler to buy rice from Tanzania. Hearing what Commissioner Lillian has talked about in terms of the three areas of cooperation and most of the international cooperation, as the EAC, what is the policy framework or policy coordination framework for border management in EAC, the East Africa Community? Flavia?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm glad to be part of the team. Basically, the framework that governs border coordination at the EAC level, I may not say that it is a one size fits all, because it has different dimensions, but particularly at a regional level, we pick the policy framework from the Customs Management Act, which is implementing the Common Customs Union Protocol, which was established in 2005. And from that time, the community embarked on establishment of common border points. So we basically look at the international practices like the World WTO trade facilitation agreements that relate to coordination of borders. We look at the Customs Union, the Customs Management Act that provides for clearance of goods across the border, and also the most recent being the OSBP, which is the act that manages the operations of the border. This act particularly brings about the establishment, the operations, and the coordination of the borders of the different agencies, as has been mentioned by Commissioner Lillian. So the policy itself is cutting across, because we have the national approaches, that particularly those that relate to the adjacent borders, because like I said, we have the regional law, but also other laws do affect the operations of the OSBP, because if a partner state A wants to collaborate with partner state B, then they have to enforce the laws that govern their bilateral operations. The framework that has enabled us to also establish the committees, the different committees to deal with the operations of the border. That is with the interagency cooperations. We have the national committees, then the regional committees, and then we have the council that usually gives directives that are implemented by partner states. That is in case there is there is need for the council to intervene. But also this one, the other policies that lead to alignment of like working hours, particularly for the borders that are operated as OSBPs. We have about 13 OSBPs that are operational, and most of them operate at different working hours. But the most important part here is the policy or the alignment of the same time to ensure smooth operations of clearance and also movement of people. We have the SAFE framework, the WCO SAFE framework, which provides for for the supply chain, particularly looking at the borders. Commissioner Lillian talked about the single customs territory. We have talked about interconnectivity. All those are embedded in the regional laws, particularly the Customs Union Protocol and the Act itself. But we also have other policies that come from the different agencies, like the police, the security, for purposes of safeguarding the security of the borders. And we also have to the other agencies that have different operational laws. So at our level as a region, we do have the Act itself, the protocol, the acts, and the international practices that help us to align our policies relating to border management. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Flavia, for painting that broad strokes in terms of the governance framework for border management from the EAC perspective. You mentioned a lot on the OSBPs, which are the one-stop border posts, and the team or the organization that has been helping us implement the OSBPs in the region is Trademark East Africa, playing a very active role in that. And so it only behoves me to welcome Alban Odhiambo from Timea, Trademark East Africa. You've heard what the previous discussants have talked about. And for me, the question is, what is the future of border management from your perspective? And how do we make border management sustainable? You've had the frameworks, you've had the policies, you've had the traction in Kenya, the traction in EAC. From Timea, what is the perspective?
Thank you very much, Wageni, and good afternoon, all participants and fellow panelists, and the speaker from WCO. A very interesting question on what's the future, and that's something we've been crafting and discussing and co-creating together with our stakeholders. And it all begins with how I would probably talk of this on how we do trade across borders in particular and how it looks like. And I would want to use the analogy of a wedding. So imagine you are in a wedding and there's the bride and the groom, and the bride and the groom during their wedding day are trying to get everything organized. So they are the same people trying to organize catering, where people sit, and all of that. It just looks messy, right? And that's exactly how we trade today, even with some of the progress we've made as a region, and hopefully we will do along the continent. That's how messy it is. The kind of trade we want, the kind of borders we want, is like when you go to a wedding. The bride and the groom have nothing to do with anything to be organized or to be done on the wedding day. It's their day. So behind the scenes, they are all the organizers, the planners who get everything done for them. Their work on the wedding day is to show up. Now, that's the kind of borders we want. We want borders where goods show up and all the other things are done. And that's the idea we think of futures of borders. So in fact, in our narrative now, we've started talking of integrated corridor and border management frameworks. So we should start thinking of the future of borders. A border is a continuum. It's not a geolocalized place where all the action takes place because of the constraints we have or the kind of procedures we have or systems we have that limits what we are able to do, and therefore all the action takes place at this confined location. This is not sustainable, even as we set up one-stop border posts. COVID demonstrated that along our borders, whether it was Namanga, Malaba, Busia, the kind of queues we could see that are there. And even present day up to now, that's the reality we have. So some of this infrastructure we are setting up to facilitate trade as long as we remain with the understanding of a border as a geolocalized position where all action takes place to facilitate trade happens, will not help us create the kind of efficiencies and connectivity we need. So we need to think of corridors, borders as a network so that connects. And therefore, the mindset we need to move into is one where actually where the consignment is, that's the border. So as the consignment moves towards the border, it's irrelevant. So we should be moving to a new dispensation where we just don't talk of one-stop border posts. We should be talking of no-stop border posts. Because why should a container be stopped at the border if we have customs and border entities of the countries of interest from the point the consignment is moving through the collaborative frameworks, cooperation frameworks between customs, other border agencies, the importers and the exporters, and across the countries of connection on transit, that they are connected seamlessly, they are sharing information, they are sharing processes and procedures, they are sharing intelligence, they are also finding mechanisms of resolving disputes. Why should a consignment stop at the border? For what reason? There is no reason absolutely, unless that reason is to identify that this consignment so crossed this border on this day. That's the kind of future borders we want, and that's the kind of our private sector needs. Our private sector does not need efficiencies where a truck spends 2 days at a border waiting to go through border formalities. Those 2 days, in terms of the value of that truck, and I'm sure Peter will resonate with this very well, the value that that business is losing by 2 days spent being static, because a truck only makes money when it is on motion, is revenue lost to that business. That revenue lost to that business is tax loss to the government. So it all has a ripple effect on all of us. So as long as you see a truck parked at a border, everyone is losing. We are all losers. And therefore, the future we think, as I said, is this seamless borders, and the technology is already there. KRA is already building some of this, and the other revenue authorities in the region are building this. And I think this is the future we want, and this is how we make our supply chains seamless across borders. Peter, I'm sure will tell you that when you talk of whether it's e-commerce or just normal conventional movement of goods in the continent, the biggest hurdles they face are logistics and, of course, cross-border payments, the issue around how payments are managed and settled. But when you look at logistics, and that incorporates all border formalities, processes, and procedures that happen at a border, there are major encumbrances in many ways that we need to make seamless. It's so disheartening that you will even hear stories, for example, either like in West Africa, we've been engaging there, where you'll hear stories like it's much easier to import an item from China to West Africa than to move it, let's say, from some part of Africa to West Africa. And we are the same continent. We need to address those issues. And I think one of them is working on our border frameworks, creating those connected corridors. And as I mentioned, the EAC experience and our experience has shown us that it's possible. The political will is there. We can leverage on that, bringing the agencies together to agree on common frameworks, and then moving towards this new dispensation of corridors and borders as seamless locations where consignments move. And that way, then we make our corridors and borders safer for our people. We make them more secure against illicit and illegal trade. We also make them more efficient and more coordinated. And that's the beginning of us creating those value chains that need to emerge to support our economies as they grow and as they become more competitive. And finally, as I mentioned, this is one of the factors, not the only one, but one of the factors that will contribute significantly, and I learned the word significantly, in making our businesses, our supply chain, more competitive within the region, within our countries, and within the continent. And as I finish and I conclude my remarks, is that let's just remember, every single time you go to a border post and you see a truck parked there for 6-7 hours, that's revenue lost. That's money we will not get. That's money gone down the drain, and all of us lose. It's not just the transport company that loses. Every single one in Kenya loses. The region loses, because that's another uncompetitive business we've just made. And that's a business that is going to be outcompeted by another business in another part of the world they are not even aware of they are competing with, that is going to, in a few years, open shop here and run them out of business. So I think the success of our businesses, the success of our system is all in our hands. And I think the vision we have of what we need to implement is there. And if we champion this, working on available solutions that are there, we can create these realities, and they are not rocket science to be done. And the EAC experiment has proven this, and I believe the continental framework will also prove this. These are things where political will, ease of negotiation, and agreeing on frameworks can make this happen. Funding could be an issue, but funding should not be what holds us back. Good solutions, good ideas, always find funding. They will never miss that funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Alban from Timea. At this summit, I think the sub-theme should be co-creation. So Alban has thrown a couple of spanners in the works. He has said, you know what, let's stop calling it integrated border management. Let's call it integrated corridor and border management. How about we even stop talking about one-stop border posts to no-stop border posts? I think Commissioner Lillian has a comment on that. But before I get to Commissioner Lillian, why don't we talk to the financiers, Mr. Jean-Guy Africa from the Africa Development Bank. With everything that you're hearing and the conversations going on, does AFDB play an active role in border management in creating a borderless Africa for trade of persons and goods? Jean-Guy?
Thank you very much, moderator. And we definitely do. And usually our intervention in border management are embedded in our wider program, particularly in our regional infrastructure programs in the area of transport. When you think of it, whenever we invest in regional infrastructure for the transport sector, it's to allow people primarily and goods to move. So over time, a clear realization was that if we do not embed elements of soft infrastructure in our projects, we will not achieve that ultimate goal of any road that is to move goods and people. So virtually every transport operation has within it elements of customs modernization, border management embedded within them, particularly transnational infrastructure, transport infrastructure projects. So usually the type of activities that would be included in those programs would focus on customs modernization, the utilization of intelligence-based risk management and post-clearance audit systems. We would aim to enhance cooperation and partnership. We would push for the adoption and the automation of procedures and maximize the use of digital technologies. We would include activities to promote a culture of integrity and a professional knowledge-based service culture. We would try and establish cost-effective dispute settlement processes, and really where it's needed, establish the legal frameworks that Ms. Nyawanda referred to earlier that would allow us to even start engaging. For example, not all borders around Africa have OSBP acts, and the model of the EAC, which I used to work for, about 12 years ago is quite a telling one. You know, before you can even bring customs to work together, you need a legal framework, a supranational legal framework. And what you see is different recs are at different levels of development. So East Africa is definitely leading the way. We've supported the OSBP, I think, between Arusha and Namanga, again, embedded within a larger program. And we are actively supporting many programs within the EAC to roll out these OSBPs across the region. I think this will serve as a sort of pilot phase that we can replicate to other regions. I'll share some of the challenges we faced in the past, some of the things we see there, you know, some of the details coming out from our ongoing support within the area of integrated management. I think the first one is resistance to change. You know, it's one thing to pass these rules, and what we see often is the center implements them relatively quickly. The center, I mean, the city. But then you find great difficulties in achieving the same level of implementation throughout all the country's border. The larger a country, the more challenging that it is to break through resistance to change. I think earlier there were mentions of the number of institutions involved: police, immigration, ports authority, customs. Imagine each has a policy imperative. In some cases, sometimes vested interests. It's very difficult to break through all of them and force through change. So resistance to change is one issue that we've often found. The dearth of, the absence of legal frameworks to back the exercise of modernizing customs is something that also run against a lot of times, particularly when you're trying to implement it at regional level. Sometimes the rules exist at national level, but there's no OSBP Act, or there's no supranational rule that governs the customs, the conduct of customs at regional level in such a way that we can move with the establishment of certain institutions that would help us move faster. Of course, you've got the issue of cooperation and connectedness among government agencies. I mentioned it earlier: police, immigration, ports, standards bodies, and then in some cases, failure to involve the private sector. Yes, so these are some of the challenges. Overall, it's an absolutely crucial sector for us because we've realized that it's one thing to build roads, multinational roads, and we're very good at that. We've invested, in infrastructure in general, close to 40 billion over the last 60 years alone. So we specialize in infrastructure. But what we've realized for transport infrastructure, regional transport infrastructure, is that we can only succeed if we involve customs early enough and we embed within it all the elements you've mentioned today, the integrated border management systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jean Guy, for that. I would like to request remind our esteemed delegates that our Q&A session is still going on and it's open for you. Do you have a question for the discussants? Do you have a question for our keynote address, Mr. Kumar Das? Please post it at the Q&A section and we shall be sampling a few of them to share with them, to our discussants and to Mr. Das. And before I head there, Commissioner Lillian, I wanted to circle back to you and hear your thoughts on, you've had John Guy's, now you have the advantage. You've had John Guy's propositions, his challenges, especially resistance to change, etc., where the center is very easy to implement, but as you spread out, it becomes a little bit difficult. But then I also want you to comment on Mr. Alban Odhiambo's proposition. How about a no-stop border post? How about an integrated corridor and border management process? We want to hear your thoughts on that, Commissioner Lillian.
Thank you, Wageni, and thank you, Jean and Alban. And I must say, these are very, insightful thoughts, and my mind is just speeding and thinking of all the possibilities, Basically, I think the challenge, and I think I like what Jean said in terms of how do we look at the legal framework, addressing the resistance that there, how do we then think beyond, where we are at right now? It calls for a lot of thinking. I'm thinking the world is basically one market right now. And as Alban said, I couldn't agree more, with what Alban said in terms of we need to go beyond thinking of the physical borders and go beyond that. And for me, as Alvan was talking, I was just thinking about basically we should look at more virtual borders. They are actually virtual borders, so that, because I'm thinking of organizations that, and they're thinking very fast, and the world is changing. I'm setting up a farm, a manufacturing plant in maybe Seychelles, and I want to supply Reunion Islands and South Africa and Mauritius and everyone else. And I don't, my market is in all over Africa. I don't have to set up manufacturing plants in all the other countries, So you leverage on where the expertise is and the materials are, and you want to, even just talk of Kenya, many companies want to set up here as a hub and then supply to the rest of Africa. So then that calls for us to think beyond, and I'm challenging myself, from a customs perspective, to think beyond just our borders, the immediate borders that we, the 7 OSBPs and the land and sea borders, and think through on then how then can we be at the forefront as customs to lead this conversation and engage the private sector, Peter and the team here, and see what are you thinking, come into their space and think, what are your thoughts? What are the possibilities? Then leverage there, look at our laws and see what then do we need to change and adjust, what are the policy changes that we require? What are the legislative amendments that may be required? And then how do we tap in then from a ESC level, ACFTA level? Africa is becoming one market. And then once we reach there as Africa, how then does Africa deal with Europe or North America? I think it's a bigger conversation, but I like the fact that we are somewhere, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. The thoughts are coming through, we are somewhere, and I'm happy to engage further and just see how we can put these think tanks together and, create a world of possibilities. So those are my reflections, Wageni. Thank you.
Creating a world of possibilities, and that's what this conversation is about. We are weaving in between the integrated border management in facilitating legitimate trade and talking about also the Africa Free Continental Trade Area. So we are just segueing between these two great conversations because we've got such a great panelists here with us, and the audience is talking. And allow me to share the first question, and it's to you, Mr. Peter Jonjo. I think that story of rice from Tanzania really tickled a couple of our delegates. And here's a question for you. So the person says, thank you, Mr. Jonjo, for sharing your insights. What are the price disparities, if any, between the rice you sourced from Tanzania, Kenya, Thailand, and India? And why do you think that those price disparities exist? So talking about pricing of rice from across our borders.
No, thank you so much. And maybe I'll just first start by providing some context. Tanzania is very different when you think about how it farms compared to the neighbors around it. So what has happened in Tanzania over the years is that people have actually settled in towns or villages, and they do not live on their farms. And their farms are more or less open for agriculture. So what you're seeing in Tanzania is that there's been a significant amount of mechanization within the smallholder farming ecosystem, which has allowed for very, very large contiguous farms producing certain products. Now, when you go to places like southern Tanzania, the other thing is that the government has a policy of certain products being grown in certain areas. So if you go to places like Mbeya in the south and all you see is rice. And what the Tanzanian government did, I think 10 years ago, was to introduce a rice variety that was specific to Tanzania. They call it Saro 5. And this Saro 5 variety has actually a larger, a more significant starch content. And the whole idea was, how can Tanzania use rice to meet its food deficiency? And what has happened over those 10 years is that Tanzania has more or less like grown its rice production or rice output by over 10x or tenfold. And that rice is now basically what we are importing into Kenya. It's very different from what you get in Thailand and India in terms of a basmati rice. But it is a rice that also is very, very nutritious and and also has a unique taste. And the difference between the two is that, you know, if you're importing a bag of rice, so we deal with 25 kg bags, because our customers, the kiosk, they normally use that rice to scoop. So you can buy a cup of rice, or you can buy 2 cups and all. So basically, this is scooping rice that is targeted towards the lower end of the market. And a bag of Tanzania rice, when the rice is in season, is sometimes as low as 1,500 shillings for a 25 kg bag. But when you're importing the rice from Thailand, sometimes it'll cost you about 2,200 shillings a bag. So you can see that there's significant disparity between the two. One can be paid using a Kenyan shilling, Tanzanian shilling equation locally. The other one is paid through using dollars. And we also have to ask ourselves, you know, in this age that we're getting into, where dollars will be very, very scarce, how do we want to use that going forward? So those are some of the dynamics that I'm seeing in terms of price. But also one thing it has taught me is that if a country really, really focuses on a problem and doesn't let go, this is not about saying that we will do it this year. You're having a 10-year program, and you can see the transformation that has happened in Tanzania. I'll give you another example. Sometimes we're even buying potatoes from the southern part of Tanzania. And those potatoes sometimes travel 1,500 kilometers to come to our warehouse. And sometimes the quality is much better than some of the potatoes you buy from, say, some of our potato growing areas in the country. And all this is dependent on how we've actually approached agriculture. So I think the key thing is that, and I think just lastly to close this point, you know, we have a huge opportunity as a country in terms of fixing some of these supply chains. But if you look at it, agriculture is 30% plus in terms of contribution to GDP. The amount of financing from banks going to agriculture is less than 4%. And that 4% is going to exporters. So the key thing is that you're expecting farmers to transform the way they produce, but they're not even able to access capital. So we need to first find ways in which we can give them access to capital and help them transform their means of producing, and basically help bridge the food gap that we have.
Thank you, Peter. I can tell you that Mr. Swalehe from the Tanzania Revenue Authority was just stamping as you talked about how much we are importing from Tanzania. And Commissioner Lillian was not very excited because we are not... You're not talking much about the Kenyan agricultural produce. However, that's not the conversation for now. Allow me to bring in Alban. Alban from Timea, we have 2 questions for you from our audience. And the first question is, what are some of the practical steps or projects that have been funded to facilitate growth to our economy, both in the short run and the long run? And the second question is, what are the practicalities of the prior suggested models to facilitate smooth export systems?
Thank you very much. Those are very good questions. So some of the practical projects, and some of them have been mentioned here, as Commissioner Nyawanda mentioned, for example, the one-stop border post. We've done a lot of one-stop border post projects, and within them also worked on creating the integrated or coordinated border management frameworks, working with KRA and the counterpart customs entities and border agencies of our neighboring states. So for example, the Moyale OSBP that was built by support from the African Development Bank, we worked on the IBM framework, working together with Ethiopian and Kenyan customs and other border agencies. And we've done the same on borders between Kenya and Tanzania at Holili, Taveta, done the same at Busia, and we've done other borders as well with the other countries that don't share borders with Kenya, e.g. Rwanda and Burundi. So those are some of the initiatives we've done. And of course, one of the big ones is on customs digitalization and modernization. So in Kenya, we've supported KRA on the new integrated customs management system. So that was funded through UK aid, supporting Kenya. Also setting up the new KRA data center as well. So moving KRA towards that capacity to be able to host, manage, build homegrown solutions that support customs modernization, having a state-of-the-art data center and hosting facility of their own. And there are other sort of softer aspects that we have supported on digitalization, work with KenTrade and many other government entities as well. So I think there's a lot we've done as an organization, particularly in Kenya. I'll mention probably the confines of Kenya, that has really helped in a way to facilitate trade and to reduce transit time. But there, as I mentioned, there is still more to do. So those are some of the practical examples. Now, whatever I was talking about as the future, I don't want us to think that this is sort of like a dream we have. Some of the steps towards this future I was talking about, as Nyawanda mentioned, of building this sort of virtual borders, or how we make it seamless, good border, it's already happening. So one of our flagship projects, we've been running this for the last, on a pilot basis for the last 3 years, is called the Trade Logistics Information Pipeline. So it's this digital backbone based on distributed ledger technology, similar to blockchain. We're working with KRA and other Kenyan government entities, of course, led by KRA and KenTrade, where the idea is we try and connect our systems, our processes, procedures with destination markets where we import or where we export. So let me give an example like the UK. So we know what we export to the UK, we know what we import from there. So we get through a digital platform, KRA and HMRC in the UK, create a coordination framework of sharing information to facilitate faster clearance. And the other agencies do a similar framework. And through this digital platform, number one, they share information and processes. So whatever is cleared by KRA as leaving Kenya, i.e. at JKIA or Mombasa port, is considered as good as already cleared in the UK market. So it will not have to be subjected to additional border rigor procedures and administration, whether it is landing at Heathrow or at Felixstowe or any of the other ports in the UK. It will access the market immediately. And that's already a project we are trying to pilot, and there's a lot of excitement about it, speaking with some of the destination markets that we sell our exports, let's say in the Netherlands, where a lot of our flowers go to. Of course, I mentioned the UK. There's of course big interest also from the US because of our Goa exports. There's also interest as well from other countries, for example, like China, on working on this. And of course, we are working with KRA as the main interlocutor of this connectivity that we would need to facilitate all the other border agencies. So this future we are talking about of virtual no-stop borders is going to be a reality sooner than later. And for me, my excitement is Kenya, East Africa is going to be part of this pioneering. 4 years ago, when we brought this idea, we were almost shut down and told it's not possible. 3 years down the line now, people are excited and saying, wait a minute, this sounds a very good way of doing trade facilitation and making sure we are facilitating access to credible data, access to data that helps customs do their evaluations, clear consignments much faster, and makes businesses focus on their core business. So I'll give an example. Kakuzi Flowers, Kakuzi, the exporters of avocados, have a large logistics department they have employed. The reason they have done that is because of the complexity of the logistics way of moving consignment, getting permits, clearance, and all that. So if we make this seamless, Kakuzi doesn't need a huge logistics department. Doesn't mean those people become unemployed. They probably now engage on more sophisticated ways of doing logistics. That's value addition. Now, this future for me, as I mentioned, I'm excited because it's going to happen sooner than later. And actually, EAC Kenya will be part of those frontline states that, believe you me, is already doing this. So this will be a new way of how then we show the world better ways of public-private sector partnership across borders, across countries, collaborating to make seamless, borderless supply chains that facilitate trade, but still guarantees security and safety against illegal trade and also illicit trade that may be happening. So I'll probably conclude there and say, just tell the audience, this is a reality for me that will happen sooner than later. And let's just work together on this. On Kenya, we are working with the agencies here very hard on pushing this. In the EAC, we are doing the same as well with Flavia's team already on similar concepts around ACT. And some of this we are going to be pushing as well as ideas at the continental level, because this is what is help us to digitally connect and translate those digital connection to supply chain efficiencies and make our businesses competitive. At the end of the day, any government, any revenue authority, any tax administration, what they want are profitable, competitive businesses, because that's how you enhance your tax bracket. That's how you enable trade facilitation to work for those businesses. And that's the clear mark that what we would be doing as facilitation is succeeding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alban. Alban, you always have one that you have in the heart that we didn't see coming. But really appreciate, I think you have ended it well, that the point is that we need to guarantee that society will be protected, trade will be facilitated, taxes will be collected, and so will statistics, even though we go the virtual one-stop border way. So thank you very much, Alban, for that. I have an audience question, and I want to bring in Flavia from the EAC. And this question goes to you, Flavia. And the audience is asking, what are some of the measures to curb the high rising rates on inflation, specifically on food and local sectors, so as to sustain growth across Kenya and the EAC, which has been stagnating? So the audience is coming from a perspective where growth in the EAC has been stagnating. So maybe that's one area you want to clarify. And then secondly, you want to give a comment on the high rising inflation rates. Flavia?
Thank you very much, Madam. Well, I will just, first of all, give the perspective that with the expansion of the ESC and having 7-member right now, we anticipate to benefit from the expanded market in terms of probably industrialization and also looking at the opportunities that come with the expansion of the community. So we would look at it in line with the approach of industrializing the East African manufacturing sector, so that we are able to curb the prices that are coming up. We noted that the Russia-Ukraine crisis really made it so difficult for the world, not only East Africa, but it was a global crisis. So we are looking at it in line with how best can we promote our own production by giving probably incentives to the manufacturing sector that will be able to improve in terms of maybe importation of fertilizers that will enhance production within our region. So the sector itself that will manage the food crisis will lead, first of all, the political will to enhance production within our area, and also provide for other incentives that will facilitate farmers, and also development of transport sector that will enhance movement of foodstuff from one area to the other. We are talking about, yes, integrated border management, but how best, if you take an example of what is usually the crisis that we usually have at Namanga, it's usually not because of the transport issue, but we know we have the infrastructure in place, but there are other barriers that create limitation in terms of access to foodstuff. We know Tanzania has quite a lot of agricultural produce, but how does it reach to the beneficiary? So those are some of the issues that we need to look at as a region and try to harmonize the procedures that come with such limitations. We have different facilities in terms of accessing the different markets. We know that region A is able to produce that much. We can come up with what they call, the sheet that will help us to understand where it has more produce and how it can easily be accessible. So it is a combination of a number of factors that can lead to the reduction in food supply or food prices that are coming up within the community. That is all I can comment on that, on the food price. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Flavia, for that comment. And you touched a little bit on the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and I'll be coming shortly to Mr. Jean Guy on his comment on that. I have a question for you. But before we go there, Mr. Kumar Das, you've had the conversation that's going around the table. I have two questions for you. One, I want to hear your comment on the conversations that are across the table. And secondly, I think there's an audience question from Mr. Kumar. And the question is, given that the future is borderless, what sustainability measures or frameworks are in place or can be implemented from the global perspective to support Africa achieve this? So one, you give us your comment on the discussion that's going around the table. And secondly is to answer the audience question. Mr. Kumar. Mr. Kumar, you're on mute. Great.
Yeah. Thank you, Ageni. Yeah, I heard very interesting conversation starting with Peter, then Lillian, then Alban. It's very interesting to know the way the things are moving with KRA leading the way and the kind of improvements that the KRA has undertaken, particularly the systems that they have put in place. It's very interesting to know that they have very robust system in place, particularly the community-based systems, and then the system like customs management. These are all based on the kind of the single window system that WCO has been championing, or coordinated border management, that the guidance, that document that we have been providing. And the other issue that Albert mentioned about the distributed ledger system, or the kind of system that they have also thought of implementing, which will take the different co-creators joining together. And when we talk about different co-creators joining the system, then we think about the safe framework of standard, which has three pillars: customs to customs, customs to business, and customs to other government agencies. The three pillars, particularly the customs to business, is one important pillar which perhaps has come out very strongly post-pandemic, and that we have also the private sector coordinated group, consultative group, which we are coordinating with customs and WCO, and this has come out very strongly during the pandemic, particularly the kind of cooperation that we received from the private sector in ensuring that vaccines are properly distributed seamlessly post our council resolution, which is how customs can seamlessly move the vaccines and also target the counterfeit vaccines. So we had different operations like Operation Stop, which was which we conducted over a period of time. Almost Operation Stop had 3 layers where we had undertaken it first with general counterfeit, how to address the counterfeit medical products. Then once vaccines got published, to ensure that the listed vaccines with the right information is carried out, and we circulate that information with the help of the vaccine manufacturers. We consulted Johnson & Johnson, we consulted Moderna, Pfizer, or all major vaccine manufacturers, and had a sensitization. Almost 5,000 customs officers over a period of time were sensitized, and this was a wonderful operation. across continent, all the member administrations with the help of international organizations like WHO, WTO, OLAF, Interpol, Europol, and UNODC, you name it, and we conducted it. So idea of telling is that what we hear today, how to move, in a digitalized world with the help of the private sector, as well as with the help of modern technology. So the WCO also has unleashed the data strategy, as I mentioned, where we have one area pertaining to the capacity building. So we intend the building capacity of all our administrations, including the African communities, as well as the entire African customs administration at large. So that is where we think the solution lies. We should have a digitalized environment as we move. Both private sector is moving, so the customs and other border agencies or border regulating agencies should move together on a coordinated border management principle with a single risk management risk engines. All of them can put their risk factors into the one single window where it can address all the risks. So that what we talk about, instead of one stop, no stop. When you say no stop, then everybody should come on the same page. Everybody should be safe, secure, and should be having a kind of mechanism within their administration which can facilitate seamlessly the secure trade. Then only we can think of no stop border. We can think of a single risk engine which can address all the border agencies' risk parameters. We can think of having a coordinated platform, having a single window which is headed by customs, like Lilian has mentioned about the kind of the like national trade facilitation, intra-agency, interagency, and international agency cooperation that the customs has been spearheading. The similar kind of structure can be there, where all these different players, including private sector, can come on the same page, and they can be certified as a truly secure uh, entity, which can be roped in the secure the blockchain technology that Alban had talked about, and what Jaga has talked about. Like we have a kind of structure. We had a kind of infrastructure which is well developed across the region, and it fits into all the administration's requirement. And more importantly, when we talk about the regional administration, regional integration, this is African continental free trade that agreement that has come about, bring in a large number of countries in the region, which hopes at a kind of the potential for intra-Africa trade. It can boost intra-Africa trade provided everybody gains in the process, and everybody can gain in the process, where the value add by each different members are all factored in, and each one acts on the competitive advantage, and they work together based on their resources, based on their expertise, and based on their competence, and can gain. And it's a win-win situation when you talk about a cooperative agreement. So what we or perhaps envisage is a kind of situation where everybody gains by cooperating, by contributing to the common agenda, and by reducing the tariff and non-tariff barrier to the minimum. So what Alban has been talking about, that yes, we can think about a better future if everybody agrees for a common agenda. So the togetherness is important, the commonality is important, cooperation, coordination is important, and that is what you have been providing. I thank you for providing this opportunity to WCO, and WCO as a champion, as a voice of 184 Customs Administration at large in the global arena, is always there to help customs administrations, to help their capacity to provide technical assistance wherever needed. And we have the tools and instruments, we have the conventions to assist and guide them, and we provide all facilities, and we have the different instruments to take care of this. So thank you once again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumar. That's a win-win for all. I was just hoping you'd finish your comments with yes, we can, because I just feel like that's the direction we were going. But before I call in Mr. Jean Guy for his question on the Russia-Ukraine conflict and its impact, we're going to run a quick poll for both our panelists and our audience. And the poll should be coming up right now, should be popping on your screens right now. And it's just a quick poll that's asking, what do trading across borders indicators measure? What do trading across borders indicators measure? A, do they measure time and cost of logistical processes of exporting and importing goods? B, do they measure no-stop border posts? Or C, do they measure one-stop border posts? The poll should be coming on your screens. Please answer it, and then we shall look at the poll results a little bit later. As we do that, Jean Guy, you've been very quiet, and I hope you're ready for this one. It's a two-part question for you. How has the value chain disruption affected trade in Africa post-COVID-19? During the Russia-Ukraine conflict? That's the first question. The impact of COVID-19 on the value chain and the impact of the Ukraine-Russia war on the value chain. And the second question is, what policy measures can African countries put in place to fast-track recovery from such disruptions? Mr. Jean Guy?
Thank you very much. This is it's a very big question. It's a very big question. Thanks a lot. Just, I think on GVCs, global value chains, I think it's important for me to just perhaps provide some very generic definition of what we mean when we talk about them. You know, if you look at it, they've been at the heart of trade-driven poverty reduction for the past 30 years, you know, ever since this era of globalization started. And what it did is that it split global production into distinct activities, and it spread across the world. And that happened primarily because of massive advances and major drops in the cost of transportation, of logistics and communication, which allowed for easier than ever before movement of people and goods. You know, you think of a car, you might think of the engine, and it's assembled, it might be assembled in the US from parts made in Europe, China, Japan. Same for a phone, same for a plane, you know, any product that you might think of. The funny thing about the dichotomy about Africa is that it's actually highly integrated into the global economy, but in the wrong way. You know, it's integrated into those lower value added tasks and activities. The share of our trade with the world is about, the share of our total trade with the world is 80 to 90%. So we primarily export to the rest of the world. And yet that our total trade only represents 3%, you know? So it highlights just how much we're dependent on the global economy for our trade, but how minute the value of our trade is with the rest of the world. And it's because everyone knows we are exporting raw materials, petroleum products, unprocessed minerals and agricultural products. I'm talking about the continent as a whole. Bear in mind, Kenya is doing quite well in this space. We're talking about Africa. So we are exporting these raw materials. We sit at the bottom of global value chains and we are powering the world industries, and yet we have very few to call our own. So our experience with global value chains has resulted in very limited transformation, structural transformation. Now, coming to to Russia, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, I think it's important not to isolate the conflict from the other crises we've been facing. For the past 3 years, Africa has been facing multiple back-to-back crises. COVID started in December 2019, right when we're beginning to recover towards the end of 2021, beginning of 2022, boom, the war in Russia started. But we must remember that in between, we also had to deal with a lot of social unrest, security threats, a resurgence of violent coups, disasters linked to climate change. So all of this exposed deep vulnerabilities in not only Africa's integration in global value chains, but in value chains themselves around the world, and a big thinking around the need to restructure them. Now, COVID affected in ways we're all familiar with, the containment measures, the immediate impact that affected us tremendously in terms of the drop in global demand for oil and mineral, the disruptions in in terms of food trade and tourism, and it pushed tens of millions in poverty. Then came the war in Ukraine. And it came right around the time when we were beginning this very painful recovery. And it pushed up inflation by, again, contracting demand and reducing the purchasing power of our citizens. But in this specific case, it was particularly, these types of crises are always detrimental to the poor, in the sense that they tend to push up inflation and reduce the purchasing power of our citizens. But in this particular case, it actually affected the very food crops that the poor depend on to survive: wheat, maize, rice, soybeans. It increased the cost of fertilizers. There's another element that is important to bear in mind. It had a very bad impact in terms of the sovereign debt situation of most African countries. We have today close to 22 countries that are either in debt distress or at high risk of debt distress. So recovering from a crisis from a position of debt distress is very difficult. So the bank, we launched a COVID response facility, and we provided billions to countries in terms of emergency finance to help maintain vital health services, expand social protection, protect jobs. And here we were capitalizing on experience with Ebola. We also launched the Africa Emergency Food Production Facility to provide the resources needed to countries to help them cope with the shocks, So in all, some of the measures that we recommend are the ones that are being discussed here in terms of how we recover. The issue of debts, we must identify ways to solve it. The G20 Common Framework for Debt Resolution is one way, where the G20 countries are bringing all official and private creditors around the table to discuss options to restructure, countries that are in risk of debt distress. And then the issues of trade policies and trade facilitation. In an environment where developed countries are placing restrictions on export of strategic items like food supplies and medical supplies, not only do we need to ramp up our own production, but it needs to move freely across. So that really links into the topic at hand. The issue of eliminating non-tariff barriers. It's of no use to implement the AFCFTA if countries turn and raise non-tariff barriers, because the net effect that we're hoping from eliminating tariffs would immediately be substituted by a raise in NTBs. And we've seen that happen in the past. The issue of access to finance, Peter alluded to it, and it's not, the AFCFTA will not succeed if it's only for the big players to buy into it. The SMEs have to be able to capitalize on that, and we've got a huge problem in terms of understanding the AFCFTA. Large companies tend to understand where the opportunities lie. I was amazed by how Peter can just, explain the dynamics and the characteristics of a single product. Not all can, surely not government, but that level of awareness about the opportunities need to go down all the way to our SMEs so that they understand what we're dealing with, and we facilitate access to finance. I've spoken about regional infrastructure. I won't go into it. We all know we need to plug them, the goods, the people, they need to move freely. And then the last one, I'll close on this one. It touches a bit on, it's on the AFCFTAs, this whole issue of supply chains mapping and sequencing. If we want to succeed at that game, we must understand global and regional trade and production and consumption patterns, like the patterns, to understand where the opportunities are. How much does it cost to produce a product and where? What type of policy should we advance? And that's where this link between private sector and government, because private sector tends to have the information that is needed for government to pass the types of policy that would help them capture better markets. Yes, so this is it for me. Trade facilitation, supply, better mapping of supply chains and where the opportunities are and the types of reforms to help us capitalize, managing the issue of debt, providing access to finance to SMEs, and plugging regional infrastructure gaps. Thank you very much, Wageni.
Thank you, Mr. Jean Guy, for that. And I liked how you started. You're saying, you know, there's the conflict in Russia, Ukraine, but what about in Africa? Are we ready in terms of the instability of some nations to actually, for us to be able to adopt to the AFCTA, that we are painting this great, glorious future, but we can't move if all countries are not at the same place. So thank you for that. And allow me to bring in Peter. Oh man, our time is fast spent. So we're going to use this also as a wrap-up session. The conversations have been so riveting. But Peter, as you come in to give your final remark, Trigger Foods is all about transforming the African retail. Picking up from what Mr. Jean Guy has just challenged us on, how is the food value chain? Africa, part of it is hungry. We are here talking about the AFCTA. So what is the place of AFCTA in supporting the recovery of the various disruptions that the African nations face, whether it's hunger or war or poverty? How do we recover in terms of the food value chain? Peter?
Thank you so much. And I also just wanted to just emphasize to Jean-Guy that we're still an SME. so I think
so the jury is still out on that one.
So one of the things I just wanted to highlight is that you know, we talk about movement of food between countries, but we also don't look at movement of food within the country. And I think that's also one thing that we need to more or less start thinking about how we address, especially now that we cannot start having technology solutions that provide visibility in terms of where the demand is and how food needs to move there. I'll just give you an example of the banana value chain, right? So most of the bananas are grown by smallholder farmers. So these farmers basically in a week maybe harvest 2 or 3 bunches of bananas. Those 2 or 3 bunches are not enough for them to hire a vehicle and go to the local market. So what you do is that you have now the first layer of brokers. This is somebody with an old pickup in the neighborhood who's able to get those bananas, put them all in the pickup and take them to the local buying center. When the bananas get to the local buying center, you find somebody else there who's then going to buy from the guy with the pickup. Now, this guy accumulates the bananas together, but does not have the resources to take it to the capital city. So they wait there until you get another broker who comes in with a 5-ton, 10-ton vehicle and loads the bananas and is able to take them to the city. The bananas then get to the city, and what you find is that now when they go into the wholesale markets, let's say in the case of Kenya, like Wakulima, you find that Wakulima has its owners. You can't just walk in and start selling, right? So you find another layer of brokers there. They buy the product and then they sell the product to a smaller market. Like you find maybe Wakulima is feeding Toy Market or is feeding Mudhurwa Market. The product then goes to that market. From there, you have somebody who goes there with a mkokoteni, picks up the product and takes it to the retailer. That product has been touched by 5-6 people since the time it was harvested. During that process, a lot of that product has actually gone to waste because as it's being handled, I don't know whether you've seen those bananas being handled in the market, they're being thrown from person to person. The likelihood of a significant amount of damage happening is high. The reason why we have some of these broken value chains is because you have a fragmented production layer where you have smallholder farmers, and then you have a fragmented retail layer, which is the small retailers. And as long as information is not flowing freely between these 2 layers, what you have is a lot of inefficiency that is created. So even as you import product, addressing these local bottlenecks is extremely important. And I think today, with cell phone technology, with a lot of the applications that we have, we can start finding solutions that actually help us deal with some of these challenges. And that's one of the things that Trigger has done to ensure that when we're thinking about the retail, how do we ease how product comes into the country and gets into the retail, or how the product leaves the farm and gets into the retail? And that's part of the challenges that we're addressing. And I think even as we're thinking about the AFCTA, these are some of the challenges where we need to figure out how do we create efficiency in terms of movement of food within the country and between countries. And that way then we start eliminating cost, we start eliminating wastage, and start building efficiency, which we pass on to consumers, who are then able to benefit from lower prices.
Wow. You've left us on a high. We were still in the market passing the bananas, but thank you very much, Peter. It's been, I mean, excellent listening to you. I want to bring in the East Africa perspective from Ms. Flavia as she gives us her parting shot. Ms. Flavia, what are the challenges and prospects of integrated border management in the EAC as you give us your parting shot as well?
Thank you very much. Quite a number, because we are looking at issues to do with the non-tariff barriers, particularly that are caused by the multiple agencies that are at the different borders, the porous borders that usually creates threats, security threats within our partner states. And this, of course, affects trade or movement of goods across the border. When we implemented the single customs territory, we anticipated that clearance of goods would start at the point of entry and would smoothly move from that first point, for instance, the port of Mombasa or Dar es Salaam, to the final destination without any interruptions. But it has proven to be that the current borders that we do have, much as they are really good infrastructure and they facilitate trade, but they still cause a bit of delay in terms of cross-border trade. So it becomes so difficult when one country imposes a certain requirement in regard to documentation, and you realize that the efforts that we have put into the simplification of processes from the point of entry to the destination is all lost in having the consignment take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days at the border, waiting for a specific document to be approved by a certain agency. So that is something that we really find as a challenge within the integrated border management. We can also talk about the issues of state relations. You can relate that some of the partner states, once they are at different, they have different misunderstandings, it really creates a very big challenge in terms of trade. Some borders are closed, and therefore the communities that are around that border may not be able to trade smoothly, and hence affecting the production of that specific area to move the goods from that particular area. Interconnectivity of systems, that means we have, yes, we have as customs, we have advanced in terms of interconnectivity, but what about these other agencies that require to approve clearance of goods? So we need to also improve on the connectivity of such agencies, and also develop, advancing the infrastructure in that particular context. So the levels of the multiple government agencies with different and conflicting regulatory policies. We mentioned of more than 15 agencies at the border, for example, one of the borders, but each agency has a regulatory framework, and that agency would like to implement or to execute that regulatory framework at the border. So it becomes so difficult to manage, much as we have a regional law, but then it is something that we need to work on in line with harmonizing some of the procedures that relate to the border. The recent COVID-19 restrictions really opened up the minds of the partner states, where we did not have a harmonized approach to dealing with the clearance process at the border. So we have to look at a way of looking at management of pandemics other than, let's say, COVID that showed us exactly what we lacked at the time. So there is a lack of coordination among partner states while we develop the policies that govern border management. Maybe the other would be, you see, some countries give authority to the local authorities nearby the borders. So these local authorities may once in a while impose certain restrictions, certain levies that may affect the cross-border trade. So they have the authority, but they are passing that authority where it is not relevant. So it becomes a challenge for us to be able to coordinate, yet it is seemed to be a national program. In terms of remoteness, where we cannot reach the security issues, where we cannot reach the interconnectivity, lack of facilities, limited personnel, and also limited infrastructure for the borders to operate smoothly. Well, it's quite a number, but all that come to the result into a number of non-tariff barriers that some of them are policy related, some of them are infrastructure related, and others are lack of harmonization of certain policies. So that is what I can submit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Flavia, and thank you for sharing your comments on this. We're doing our wrap-up session. You know, I'm torn between calling Mr. Jean-Guy or Mr. Alban, but I know if I call Alban, he's going to throw a big one. And if I call Commissioner Lillian, she's going to have to take it. So I'm going to ask Alban to go fast, and then I'll call Jean-Guy to take what Alban will throw and catch it in the air. And then Commissioner Lillian will finish it up for us. So Alban, as you give us your parting shots, tell us, I know you've shared very many huge ideas that are quite exciting. Some are quite, wow, hair-raising. But how can Kenya leverage on technology and partnerships to enhance border management in a globalized age, even taking from what Flavia has just shared?
Thank you very much. I mean, very quickly to answer that, I think KRA is already doing a good job at that. If I talk of KRA, other government agencies, of course, in Kenya are doing a similar job as well. So like partnerships we've done with KEFIS, for example, around plant health, also with AFA around the trade in agriculture and food, Kenya Ports Authority as well. So I think there's a lot of awareness and consciousness within Kenya government agencies on the power of digital technologies to sort of help them address some of the inefficiencies, some of the governance challenges they face in the environment where they operate. So I think that's already there. So when we talk about cross-border engagements, I think KRA is part of that sort of family of entities that is already venturing into that. So for example, implementations of systems like the regional electronic cargo tracking, that's already KRA using a common digital framework together with other customs administrators in the region to facilitate that movement and leveraging on technology. Under the ACT framework as single customs territory, as Flavia explained, it's also part of that KRA opening up and sharing information to facilitate faster transit. So for me, I'm very happy that there is that consciousness within KRA and other government agencies as mentioned that has that. I mean, I'm proud to say at KRA in particular, Customs Administration, the Customs Department, you have very brilliant minds there, people who think big, people who adventure, they're going for those daring ideas as we spoke about them here. They're not shy to go there. And the biggest part of it is they have their hearts as well. They wear their hearts to this. So they are invested emotionally. They are also invested in terms of the mindset of where they want things to go. Doesn't mean that we are doing our best, but we have the ingredients to do better. And I think that's where KRA is. There is always room for improvement for us to do better. And some of these innovative ideas we are talking about are those things. And just echoing what was said in the panel in the morning, the idea about co-creating, so getting customs to journey together with the private sector, in as Kumar mentioned, that private sector, customs collaboration, and government agencies together. KRA in the Kenyan context, and I guess in many other administrations, jurisdiction, customs playing that role of really driving the agenda of facilitating trade to achieve those objectives that any economy would want to achieve, to drive growth, to drive that independence of the country, and drive the growth of wealth in the country. So I think from the digital space, KRA is in a very good space. They're doing the right investments, doing the right things. There's more to be done. There's more investment required. There's more effort to be put. And I guess partners like ourselves, I'm sure AFDB, are willing to work and journey with institutions like KRA to achieve these objectives. Because as Jean-Guy mentioned, this is how we create a continental market for ourselves. This is how we ensure we create sustainable businesses in the continent and in Kenya for that matter, because then we have a digitally connected continent. We have a way that it's easy. The day we have, as Peter mentioned, a grower of bananas somewhere in central Kenya or of maize somewhere in eastern Kenya, who is able to know that there's a market for their maize in Ghana, then we know we have arrived. And we will get there. And for me, that's my parting shot, that's what the continental arrangement is all about. It may seem a pipe dream for many, but I don't think it is. The fathers and the mothers who were in Addis and signed this agreement had a vision. Most of them may not see it, but I think we have the responsibility to make those steps every day for us to get there, because it guarantees then the future of our continent and the stake we need to claim, as Guy mentioned, within the global trade. We have a stake, we've not claimed it. It's there, we need to go and claim it. No one will give it to us on a silver platter. We must go and claim it. And doing these things we are doing and talking about now is how we begin that claiming process. And finally, these things, now maybe the bigger word to throw, they are not really big, is essentially how we become smart. So have smart corridors, have smart borders, smart customs, smart businesses. This is the infrastructure we need. And believe you me, if we have this, we beat the rest of the world, pants down, no doubt about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alban, from Team Mayor, that we need a smart ecosystem. And thank you for the great accolades for Commissioner Lillian. I'm going to call her, but first let me hear from Mr. Jean-Guy. Your parting shots. We've talked about the AFCTA, we've talked about the integrated customs border management system. We want to hear your final parting shot from the AFDB.
Thank you very much, Wageni. I've very much enjoyed this exchange, and I wanted to bounce off of Alban's words to say that I am, and really the African Development Bank is just as optimistic about not just KRA, but just Kenya in general, and it's mostly from my perspective about the capabilities, You have a vibrant private sector, and I still recall those days when I used to work at the EAC and we were negotiating the Common Market Protocol. It amazed me how private sector was able to influence the policy positions of government. So and it's notwithstanding the challenges you might have, but there's clearly a vibrant private sector, a forming and strong industrial fabric that is growing, and that merger between government, bond or that working relationship between government and private sector that is necessary to capitalize on something like the AFCFTA is clearly working or at play in Kenya. So Kenya is fully ready for the AFCFTA. KRA has a clear indication of the needs in terms of what needs to be done in terms of making borders borderless or even virtual. I was quite amazed that there is even this discussion. And all I wanted to tell you is that you can continue to count on the African Development Bank. We will continue to work with the government of Kenya, with the East African community, and the whole of Africa. In the EAC region alone, we've invested close to $10 billion. We've got an active portfolio of close to 10 billion in energy, transport, water. In Kenya alone, since 1967, we've invested in the neighborhood of 5 billion, again, mostly in areas like transport, public financial management, trade, and OSBPs. And every time we received clarity in terms of what the strategic orientations were from government in each area. So that's really helpful. And my parting words is that you can really continue to count on us and to make sure that Kenya benefits from the AFCFTA, but not just Kenya, the whole of Africa, ultimately. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jean Guy. Alban says we can do better. Jean Guy says we are on the right track. I want to call upon Commissioner Lillian. These are your key partners, Commissioner. Timea, you have AFDB, you've got EAC, you've had what they have to say. What is the role of stakeholders and key partnerships, so to speak, in implementing this, the AFCTA for you and the cross-border management, as you give us your parting shots?
Thank you, Ageni. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Evgeny. And I can't overemphasize the role of our stakeholders who are all represented here, and we can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough. And I would say that Kenya as a country, and even KRA and even customs, would not be able to have reached where we are without the partnership, the support, the collaboration, and the constant nudge to push us, to get where we are. So we are really, really grateful. And I believe this is just the beginning. We look forward to even more and greater partnerships and collaboration and, challenges to move forward. Sometimes we get stuck in thinking we've arrived. So that constant nudge to just, keep telling us you can go higher, we can go virtual, you can go, beyond. That keeps the energy going and the drive, and ensuring at the end of the day that we we deliver our mandate, which is revenue collection, trade facilitation, and protecting our borders, and of course, impacting the community along the way in all this. So in closing, I would say as Africa and the world, gears towards becoming a global market, then cooperation, the words that have been used here that are cooperation, coordination, collaboration, and if we can pick the word of the day, co-creation, then will be the vehicle to ensure seamless integration, both locally, regionally, and globally. So where does customs come in then? Our responsibility as customs is then to be present in all these conversations, to be agile and adaptable, and to be responsive to the needs of our stakeholders and our customers. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Nyawanda, just emphasizing that customs has a seat at the table when these conversations are taking place, and not just a passive seat, but an active seat. You have meetings where people are just passive and they say nothing. I like the emphasis that we're here and we're also going to do something about it. To wrap this whole conversation and this engagement we've had, allow me to bring back our keynote address, Mr. Pranab Kumar Das. What have you had? What is your parting shot? Were the conversations exciting for you? Did they meet your objective now that you gave us the keynote address?
Yes, tell you, Vagini, I'm really thrilled to hear so many interesting topics being told in so animated manner. I'm very hopeful. And as a global voice for the customs community, you heard Lillian leading the way as customs community in KRA. I'm talking about WCO as a leading global voice of all 184 member administrations. We really look forward to a smart and secure ecosystem. I talked about the three pillars that safe framework of standard as envisaged once we really implement and we have authorized economic operators in all streams, not only among the various operators, but also among the, when we have started implementing in e-commerce, we have started trying to implement in free zones, and the Alban referred to about the secure, the pipeline, kind of the distributed ledger system technology, the modern technology that we can imbibe, that will set the tone for the entire process, and we can look forward to a better and more secure future, and a win-win situation with the greater cooperation with the private sectors, with more coordination among the government agencies, and customs leading the way with a very smart single window, with very high reliable risk profiling system, so that we can really look forward to a kind of no-stop system that we have been envisaging or we have been dreaming of. So with that, I think we are looking forward to a better future, and AFCFTA definitely has a greater role in that regard, because the regional coordination and the kind of win-win situation it can, and a level playing field that it can platform, it can present, that will set the tone for the better growth for the entire African Union and the all the administrations therein. And we can definitely look forward to a better future for all the African communities, including all business and everybody there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumar Das. Thank you so much, my discussants. What an amazing and engagement discussion we have had this afternoon as we talked about scaling the tide, the customs administration in the globalized age. And we're talking about tomorrow today. So we have loved the conversations. I hope you have also loved the conversations. Before we close this particular session, may I request that all the discussants and the panelists put on their cameras so that we can take a screen grab. Alban talked about the people who met in Ethiopia one time and birthed the dream of the AFCTA. Maybe some of them are here, maybe some of them are not here. So let's also take a picture so that the future generations will also know that we were here. And we also want to request our Commissioner General also as well to please put on his camera as well. And anyone from the KRA Board of Directors, yes, I see you, Ambassador. I see you, Mr. Solehe. Thank you very much. I see you. I see you. Thank you for the cameras. I think they're on. I see you, Director Mukesh. I see you, Commissioner Matuko. All right. Why don't we take this grab? I am asked that if we can wave. I don't know what the wave means. I think we're just saying hello to each other. And there we go. And the screen grab has been taken. Thank you very much. Want to thank you, Mr. Das, for your engagement. Thank you, our discussants, Mr. Peter Jonjo from Twiga Foods, Commissioner Lilian Nyawanda from the Kenya Revenue Authority, Mr. Alban Odhiambo from Trademark East Africa, Mr. John Guy from AFDB, Miss Flavia Businje from the EAC. And have I left any other of my panelists? I want to say thank you very much for this particular session. I feel like I have left one more panelist, and my apologies if I have. But thank you very much for your engagement. And we were, like I mentioned in the morning, we were going through the participants of the day, seeing who's engaging most in our comment section. And the team has gone through, we have the participant of this particular session, and we have had loads of questions. So our panelists, we request that, at your own free time, you may look through those questions and the interactions. However, the participant of this session, they were two, and we have Mr. Isaac Nyongesa and Miss Emma Nganga. So Mr. Isaac Nyongesa and Miss Emma Nganga, congratulations for being the participants of this particular session when we talked about customs in the globalized age. Please send your full name, your physical address, and your mobile number to the email that will be shared with you at the Q&A box, which is stakeholder.engagement@kra.go.ke. That's stakeholder.engagement@kra.go.ke. Ladies and gentlemen, we asked you a poll question. I think on my end, they came out too, and we're ready to show you the results. Are we ready to show you the results? Oh, there we are. So the first question was, select the best indicator of trading across borders. And 64% said time and cost of the logistical process. I was hoping to see maybe at 80%, but yes, the answer is A, time and cost of the logistical process. And no, the answer is not B, nor is it C. The second question was select the option that is not a consideration for cross-border trade. And yes, correct. The answer is enhanced fraud. However, we see there are a few responses that talked about increased revenue and expansion to new markets. I think it's an opportunity for us to engage with our stakeholders even more to clear the air. So thank you very much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for participating in the poll question. As we bring this summit to a close today, we're going to go through a story. We love stories. We are Africans. We love stories. We tell best our stories through visuals. And so over the years, we've had the annual tax summit. Every summit has an objective that it chooses, that it opts to accomplish. And so we want to show you a video that talks about the tax summit over the years, the objectives that were there, and what we have accomplished so far. Wow. Thank you so much for that story. That is our milestones for the previous years that we've had the annual tax summit. What you've told us, we've been able to implement, perhaps not at 100%, but yes, we've been able to implement. And thank you very much for that video. Thank you so much, our delegates from across Kenya, across Africa. We've had such a great conversation today, great conversations from the morning. Thank you for registering, for joining us today and staying with us until this point. It's been such a privilege to have hosted this year's annual tax summit, which is the 8th annual tax summit. My name is Wageni Wamba, and allow me now to welcome our Commissioner for Investigations and Enforcement, Dr. Edward Karanja. He is also the co-chair of this annual tax summit, and Dr. Karanja will give the vote of thanks and then usher in the Commissioner General, Mr. Gedi Mboro. Good afternoon, Dr. Karanja, and how are you?
Fine, thank you. Hope I can be seen.
Yes, you can be seen and you are loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. The KRA Board Chairman, the Commissioner General, our esteemed keynote speakers and panelists, our sister revenue agency heads and colleagues, our esteemed taxpayers, all our colleagues and staffs, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to take this opportunity to thank Ambassador Mudaura, the chairman of KRA Board of Directors and the Commissioner General, for opening this summit and giving us hope that as per the theme, it's an inspiring theme, and I believe we'll be inspired throughout. I wish also to thank you all, especially our speakers, for accepting to share with us your knowledge, experience, and insight in this year's annual summit. I especially want to thank our keynote speakers, Dr. Justin, Dr. Justin Zake and Dr. Des for your mind-blowing challenge to us in Kenya and Africa on how to take tax administration to the next level. I also extend special thanks to the panelists, that is our Director Mokesh, Commissioner Lispa, Mr. Karinongo, and Mr. Buyagumba. We thank you for your contribution in the VAT compliance discussion. We really learned a lot on how to make our revenue systems more responsive to the needs of the business and the economy. I would also want to thank our Mrs. Fon Wafura, Mr. Yuo, and Dr. Nyangena for enlightening us on the power of data and how data analytics is used in enhancing compliance in tax administration in general. I also extend our gratitude to Mr. Jojo, Mr. Jean Africa, Commissioner Radian, Fravia, and Odiabo for nourishing us with extensive knowledge on the opportunities for customer administration to drive service delivery in the contemporary global commerce. Finally, I thank the taxpayers, our sister tax administration agencies, international development partners, our staff and organizers of this forum, organizers of this summit for overseeing and ensuring realization of successful summit where knowledge meets practice I also want to take this opportunity to thank our moderator, Madam Wageni, for the great job of moderating all these sessions and making sure that we are kept awake and alert during the entire summit. It is now my great pleasure to invite the Commissioner General, Mr. Borogedi, to give his closing remarks. Thank you all and happy Taxpayers Month. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward, and for those wonderful, that wonderful vote of thanks. I hope I can be heard, ladies and gentlemen. We have had a very wonderful engagement today. I think, Wageni Wamba, you have performed at grade A. Indeed, you've done very, very well. Very energetic indeed, steering the conversation through. Our panelists too have done very, very well. The engagements were very, very deep. Indeed, deep and practical. And I truly appreciate what came out of these engagements. I deeply noted that the now and the future of tax administration will be driven by technology. But we also noted that technology alone is not enough. Therefore, we also have to add the collaborative approach to dealing with our taxpayers. It came very clear that feedback is very, very important. And as a tax administrations, we must listen to the feedback coming out, and then we must go out there and give solutions to the issues that affect our taxpayers. Service delivery therefore remains critical to our operation. Our attitude towards taxpayers remains that of service delivery. The engagement, in my own view, came also brought out the place of data. That data continues to be very critical in our work, because that which is supported by data then has what we'd call an expected and credible outcome. So we will continue to deploy data in risk management. Came out very clearly, and that risk management will therefore be able to guide our interventions as tax administrations, so that then we deploy our resources as appropriate. The last topic was very engaging indeed, very deep in terms of the future of customs and the phenomenon of virtual borders, which I really thought through as the debate was going on, how we will be looking at, once goods are cleared in one country, then they have free access to the other country. That would be a tremendous move indeed. And therefore, what I saw from that is the need for the country from where the goods are cleared to invest properly, because that country's systems must be dependable, must be credible. The technology and the processes must be right. The risk management, everything must be right, so that then the rest of the world can trust. And the less incidences of non-compliance, the better in terms of promoting the trust. I was very excited also to note from our very able panelists that the TIMEA and the Africa Development Bank and other sponsors remain open to us as tax administrations to continue supporting our endeavors. So we truly are grateful for that kind of support. And I want to assure you that in my own view, this particular tax summit has built on the past and has lived to its billing as a platform where great ideas emerge and we have deeper conversations like we have had today. It is my conviction, delegates and distinguished panelists and our participants, that the ideas that we have received in this summit will continue inspiring us to continue improving in our systems and processes, our attitude towards our customers, and in the greater good of serving our countries and humanity. So allow me to thank all of you once again for being there, participating in this forum. The participants were quite engaging. I did love the questions. I listened to many of those questions, and they were very informed questions, meaning that our participants were very engaged, and they listened and they had a great focus on the issues that we were discussing. So I would like to finish my closing remarks, assuring you that we will continue improving our processes and continue improving the nature of engagement we have through this tax summit into the future. On behalf of the KRA board and management and myself, the staff of the KRA, want to thank all of you who participated in this forum, guests, panelists for accepting to come and spend your time with us, investing in preparing to work with us and giving us many ideas that we are going to implement and consider moving forward. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, our Commissioner General of the Kenya Revenue Authority. You've wrapped it up so beautifully. We really just wish this was a 2-day summit or maybe 3-day. But, well, we are very cognizant of the times we're in, and we are grateful for the great conversations that we've had. Tomorrow, though, we shall be having a public lecture on the transformation on stilts towards tax administration 3.0. So, ladies and gentlemen, we want to welcome you to tomorrow's session. Same link, same time from 9 a.m. We are going to finish today's session with the anthem, and then you're free to leave. Thank you very much.